And we are live. Welcome to the first Nomad Community Office Hours of 2023. So good to have so many of you here. If you're joining us in the chat, let us know where you're from. We love to see repeat viewers. We love to see new viewers. And we are looking forward to your questions. But before we get to that point, one very important thing. This is obviously a professional event. So be nice to people, be welcoming, be inclusive, and be friendly. If you see something in the chat that you think is not cool, let one of us know. We're also actively watching, but report it. We want this to feel safe for everyone, and that means we need your help. With that, let's do a quick round of introductions, and we're going to start with you, Julie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie. I'm the product designer on Nomad. Been in the team a little bit more than a year. So yeah, first time being here.
Exciting for you to join us. Thank you. Phil, you're up next on my screen.
Hey, I'm a UX engineer here on the Nomad team. I got here in March of last year and have been eagerly reading a lot of the UI and UX asks and working on them as they've come up. Eager to show off some new things today.
Nice. And Jai.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jai. I'm a UI engineer. I've been at HashiCorp for the last 2 years. And I'm coming in just outside of New York City.
Beautiful. Mike, you've been here before.
I have, yeah. I'm Mike Nomich, product manager on Nomad and ex-Terraform cloud engineer. Been at HashiCorp 4 years.
That makes you furniture, right? Yeah. Lots of knowledge, lots of exciting stuff. So, Mike, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just set some context for the stuff that Julie and Phil and Jai will show off. And I'll share my screen. Excellent. So a little bit of context. So what we want to do is show off some works in progress, things that we are currently working on as kind of the broader front end UX design team at HashiCorp or on the Nomad team. And just fair warning, these are works in progress. What we eventually ship will probably not look like this. And hopefully it doesn't, because hopefully we get feedback from you all in this session, or if you're watching async, you can post comments on GitHub, things that you don't like about this, or things that, would take this from, a B to an A+ in terms of experience. Like, we really want your feedback, whether that's in the chat or async after. So, just a fair warning, most of what you'll see here is either in a mock-up stage or in very early engineering stage, not necessarily shipped. And let's get your feedback. That would be awesome. So that's goal number one for this session, is get feedback, but also, of course, build a little hype, because that's fun. So what we're going to talk about for the beginning is the job show page and deployments UI. And just a reminder of what that is. This is the current page. When you look at it, shout out to the Void Linux user group. This is their Prometheus job running. And this page is a really important page in Nomad, right? Other than the job index, it's probably the main jumping off point for a lot of tasks that you want to do. And it's really integral to the experience of using Nomad, right? You're going to see this no matter what you're doing with Nomad. This is going to be kind of a big part of your workflow. My question to the chat and the users is, what do you think the most common feedback we get is, right? Like, what's the most common criticism? Or, people say, hey, I have this workflow, I really wish it were better, from the job page. So I'm gonna, at the end, I'll go over some of our most common feedback, but if you have anything in the chat and you wanna kind of drop your feedback, like, hey, what could be better about this page? I'd love to take some time to go over that kind of before we get into what we're doing. So Kareem, if you could, source some of those questions or some of those feedback, some of that feedback in the chat as we go, that'd be great. So yeah, awesome. So take a second, look at this page, think, hey, what could be better? All right, and I'm gonna go over some of the complaints we hear, and this is, again, just the context to set why we're doing what we're doing. And so number one is my Nomad job actually healthy? So we have this, running status, but that doesn't necessarily tell you, is this job totally healthy or not? Are there things I have to go change? So you could be in a situation where you have, multiple versions of your Docker container running. So that might be unhealthy to you, but it's not necessarily clear from this one status. Or you might have one instance running, but you expect, 10 instances to be running, right? The job is technically running, but it's not necessarily clear. And other things on this page don't necessarily make it hard or easy to figure that out. You kind of have to piece together information. You have to know, how the allocation status works, how the deployment status works, just to get this, kind of comprehensive view of, is my job healthy? Do I have to take action? So that's, number one piece of feedback. Number two is people say there's too much red. And this means a couple things. One, they're talking about this red, which is, hey, I had allocations that failed a month ago. Why are they still showing up on my job show page? I'm onboarding a new employee to Nomad, and they see this red and they freak out and they think, oh man, things must be actively failing. But really they failed in the past when we were, writing the job for the first time or debugging some issue. And this red can, again, make people think that their job is unhealthy. They have to take action even when they don't, or it can distract from the times when they do have to take action. And then this red right here, which isn't in this picture, but when this unhealthy count goes up, that turns red, and that can really freak people out. So Nomad might be in a deployment, for some reason there's an intermittent failure, but then the deployment's successful, and people see this, unhealthy too. And again, they kind of freak out. They think, hey, something must be wrong with my job because, I see this kind of glaring red box right in my face. And so that's some feedback. Next, which is related to the last point, is I don't understand what's happening during a deployment. So this box here, it's really helpful if you already know how an update stanza works and you already know what's going on in a deployment. But if I'm a first-time Nomad user, someone being onboarded to the team, this box wouldn't help me learn what's going on, right? I could see if something's successful or not, but I kind of have to piece together various bits of information to understand what actually happened during deployment. So that's another thing we want to fix. Next up, how is this job supposed to act? And for that, often people are saying really like, I want to know what the job definition is so I know if something's going wrong or not. And if they go to the job definition, we kind of make it hard to figure out what this should be. There's a big blob of JSON that we put in here. And if you want to figure out, what's the, max parallel, you have to kind of sift through this JSON. And if you want to make an update, it's even harder, right? There's a lot of scrolling and control Fing that you have to do. And then lastly, there are too many clicks. And this is something that I think, let's see. Oh man, all right, great timing. Task has so many clicks and you need to get used to it. So I'm showing off one workflow that we've kind of rectified, and that used to be, hey, I want to get to my error logs. And you'd have to go from the job to the task group to the allocation to the task, and then click on the error logs. That was a lot of clicks, and that's something with the sidebar that we've tried to rectify. But I'm really interested to hear, are there other workflows other than getting to logs that you feel like were too many clicks? You have to go too deep. What's something we could surface to the top that would be good information to have? Or, hey, I'm always doing this over and over again. What if this were just on the job page? So I haven't been monitoring his chat. So is there anything else that's kind of come up that's worth mentioning?
These were definitely the highlights. Of course, we've got a few more rolling in. So if you have feedback, definitely let us know. Joe shared with us that there was too much red. I think the internal joke is always that if you have too much red in your Nomad job, just write better software.
And then purge your job and run it again, right? That's not good, right? All right, cool. So if there's other stuff async or you have any other comments and you think of something in 5 minutes, just drop it in the chat. It's really good to get this feedback, but glad that we're roughly on point with what we've heard so far. All right, so that's the job page, and that's all the context of what we're doing. Again, really important page in the Nomad UI experience. And now I get to turn it over to Julie, who's going to not talk about the problems, but talk about what are we actually doing to solve it. And again, I just want to stress any feedback you could give. And we have this improved job and deployments UI. That's a GitHub issue. We could drop a link in chat. Really good place to drop your comments as well.
And before we bring in Julie, Ivan shared some interesting feedback with us. Ivan would like to see there we go. He would like to see an overview of what's going on when you click a job, such as a log stream, graph allocations, and what else you have. And Sylvain on LinkedIn shared with us that the UI looks a little bit old compared to console or Vault.
Yeah, we definitely get both those feedbacks, or both those points. I think on the first point, I'd be interesting to hear from Ivan, like, what exactly that means. So like some people want kind of like a topology view for each job where it shows, the node, each node and things running. Some people want to combine log stream with, all the errors, all the standard out from like all the jobs, all the allocations running for a job. So I'd love to hear more feedback there, what you mean. And regarding the UI, that's also something that we've talked about a lot internally, and Julie's on the design team. They definitely want to make things feel consistent, and that's in our queue somewhere, but it's a pretty big task. But yeah, let me turn it over to Julie, and she'll go over the mockups.
Cool. Let me share my screen.
And as soon as that's up, we'll add it. Shantanu, Ivan, hit me up afterwards. We'll connect each other and make sure we can get your feedback in and help it to form a better idea.
Cool. So next, I'm going to show you the design that we've been working on to solve some of the problems that Mike mentioned. Like Mike said, we would like to hear more of your feedback on the new design. We want to know what you think about this, and so any feedback is welcome. Don't feel like it will hurt our feeling. We would like to hear that, so then we can all build better products, make it easier to use, easier to understand. In this design specifically, I'm showing a service job, and you will probably notice the area that has a major difference is this status section. Our main goal actually for this design exercise is, first, we want to better explain for service jobs, better explain the whole deployment process, especially visually how it actually works. Currently, like Mike showed, there's only just numbers showing like the place or desire, but doesn't really tell people the whole process. So visually, I think there's a lot of room that we can show people and help people to understand how Nomad actually work during deployment. And then the second thing's too much red. We don't want to show the failed allocations that in the past that people may not care. So we kind of hide that information and then just showing like some failed allocations for the current or the last deployment. So let me explain a little bit more on like what you are seeing here in detail. First of all, I mean, this job is running, but I will show you some other examples that we want to introduce more job status to make clear on what's going on that job. And then also we're introducing this toggle that people by default, you will see what's the current status. You will still see the historical, which is like what we currently show, which is like a progress bar. But I think the feedback that we got, most people will care about what's going on right now on my job. And then the main idea for this boxes is that each box will represent one allocation, and then the total amount reflects the desired count. So because what we heard people saying is like they want to know, what they tell Nomad to do, which is the desire, and then also how far it goes. So what is the current status? So in this example, you will see 7 allocation got placed out of 7. So 7 is running, and then 7 is how many allocations people ask the job specs define. So this is more clear in this way to explain what is the current status on this job. And then on the right side, I mean, the color code is exactly the same as what we currently have, but we just like having different visualization to show the status. And then on the right side, the numbers also reinforce how many is desired and how many is running, and then the fail state. Each of them can link to, I think what we currently have is like you can link to a table that's showing the allocations that only which is running or the allocation that failed. Addition to that, we also want to show like what are the versions that involve into this in this deployment, because people might have multiple versions in one job, and it's currently not quite clear. People right now have to go to like the tables to really look into the versions, but we want to make it clear what are the versions in this job. And lastly, I guess in this page, what we did is that we also switched the order between like the task group and then the reason allocations, because what we heard is people more likely to look into like the reason allocations instead of the task group. But we also want like to hear what you think about if we switch the order. Is this a right move, or do you think task group is also important? Cool. I'm going to show you while imagine there's a job got updated, someone update this job, and then we're in deployment. So the status will change, saying this job is deploying. I think we keep the same treatment as like the blue color to show, this is deploying, to make it very clear that your job is deploying. And you can see the box change a little bit, that we want to show two rows. First row showing like what is the previous allocation, and then the second row showing the new allocation status. And I'm going to show you how that actually in action, how that actually work in action in a little bit. But the idea is that when the new allocation start rolling up, you will see like they become running, and then the previous allocation will slowly get completed. And a couple of things I want to highlight as well is that we also adding this section called deployment history to really explain what's going on during this deployment. What is the canary, which one become canary, when there's failed allocations, what are the error message, and how the system actually fixed it, and stuff like that. And then the other part here that we added is this update parameter. So then people, like, we want to show people what they actually write, because sometimes the user is not the one that actually writing the job spec. So it would be good to actually, because this is the one that actually affects how the deployment works, like how many things, like what's the max parallel, is it like how many canary, it is auto promote. For example, if it's like if I make it actionable, like when when it's running, when the canary is running, if it's auto promote is false, then user have to click on this button manually to promote the canary. Then the whole deployment will keep going. But these all affect the whole process. So I think it's good information to actually show to the user. So you can see, when things going, the new allocations start rolling up. There's also, I don't know if you noticed, there's also a placement failure happening in one of the allocation. We show the message there, and it's got replaced. Sorry, it's a little fast. You get the idea. Cool. Cool. Is there anything? I guess this is like when the deployment finished, then we show when it's running, and then what's the status, similar to like the first page that I show. Mike, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I would just kind of note the failed or lost link. Before that used to show up as like red, that was the same like level as your green, even if that's, like if something fails, it's kind of like thrown away, right? Like, hey, this is old news now. What's the latest status? And so you'll still be able to access, your failed or lost allocations from the deployment. via a link, so you could inspect what happened. But each kind of slot in the UI is showing what's currently out there, not what's currently out there versus what you want, and not all the historical allocations as part of this. So that's pretty important, and that kind of jumps into the what I assume you're about to show off with the historical tab versus the current.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, the historical tab is basically showing the same what we currently have, and then sometimes you will see like all like within all the versions, and then they might have like, for this example, there's like 42 field, but in some type of job maybe it will be useful, but we specifically think like for service job, the current is probably most important.
And I guess this is an open question. We've had debates. Should we just remove this historical information wholesale from the UI? Right? Is this just a distraction? Would people are people actually using this? Right? Like this information eventually gets garbage collected, so it's not like it's the full status in perpetuity. Is this helpful? Or should we, is this a distraction and we should just keep the current allocation status the main thing? So if you have any hot takes on that, feel free to drop that in chat too.
I'll throw in my first hot take for this one.
Yeah.
Whenever I hit a new cluster, something your team has worked on and you haven't necessarily been part of, I try to get a feel of what the tasks have been doing, and especially what's not green. And the historical tab basically tells me what's lately been going wrong. Not like you said, like once it gets collected, it's gone. And obviously you should have real monitoring that tells you where your bugs are. But just for a quick view, it's like a taste of what could be failing and why it's failing.
Yeah, I think that's very good feedback. I think another thing that, I've been thinking of, also laughing at that pun, I often will jump to, inspect the most recent failure when I deploy a job and something, but maybe we could click something and we swoop out the logs of the most recent failure or something like that. Like, so any just I'm throwing that there to ideate any workflows that people like feel like, hey, I'm constantly doing this when I'm deploying, or I'm constantly doing this when I check out a job, whether it's inspecting an allocations logs or something else. Feel free to add that. But I'll shut up now and move it back to Julie.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I saw some comments. Yeah, we like I said, we would like to hear more and then see how can we improve this. And actually, specifically, I think the main question people ask after seeing this UI is like, what if what happened if there is like 1,000 plus allocations? I think we have some big customers that may have reached have a very big cluster that have hundreds of thousands of allocations on one job. So I'm going to also show you what it could look like. Sorry, let me just close this. So this is so we're trying to reshape the boxes so then you can fit more in the box, but the whole idea is the same. And then I think for like the large cluster, the number actually does really matters, because people won't know actually exactly how many allocation is actually running and stuff. So I think the number is very critical to them. But you can still see the progress of when the job is running, but it will aggregate some of the one that's in the queue will be aggregating to these numbers. So yeah, cool. I think that's most of the things I want to share about this deployment UI that we've been working on. Next, actually, I'm going to show you also the HCL stuff, like the job definition, the small changes that we want to do. But before that, I wonder, Kareem, is there any feedback or any comments that was mentioned here? Oh, I don't think I can hear you.
My bad. Mics are hard. Shantanu had a really good one. where he says the running pill in green is misleading even if the task has not reached healthy. Could the running but not succeeding be shown on the first page of jobs? And I'll add Mike in there for this one as well.
Yeah, Shantanu, that's really good feedback. So this is, like if you have a console health check that has not succeeded, right? You're deploying your job, but it's still booting up, or it's, I don't know, running migration or something. That's definitely something we thought about, but it's hard, frankly, like on the back end. So very good feedback. I think there might be some technical challenges to get there, just because it would deal with more queries. But yeah, I totally think that's valid. Like running and not yet healthy might be a good status, or running and responding to every check that's been defined on the job would be different. So I don't even know what you would call those statuses, but yeah, that's something we thought about. I think there are some technical constraints, but probably not like capital H hard constraints. So maybe that would be something for, V2 of this or 2.x. But yeah, definitely good feedback to get.
And then also in terms of good feedback, Ivan had an interesting one. Right now we have to click a bunch before we get to the job alloc logs. And then it says image can't be pulled because reason X. Would be great if that is front and center when doing deployments.
That's really good feedback for the deployment. I also think Phil might be showing something off related to this. If you want a sneak peek, it's pull request 15733, trying to expose that information. But that's, that pull request is not in the context of deployments. So it's really good thought. Like, can we get those task events surfaced on failed jobs quicker? And I think maybe the sidebar could be used, the sidebar logs pattern, task events surfaced. So thank you for that feedback.
Great feedback indeed. Keep them coming. And definitely check out that pull request.
Cool. All right. Next, I'm going to show you also a quick fix that we think it will be very helpful to a lot of our users. One of the pain point here that we hear from the users that when they submit their job specs, usually it's in HCL. But if you go to like when you submit it and you go to see the job definition, it's usually in the JSON. It's always in the JSON format, and then it's also showing all the whole specification with like all the default value. And we heard a lot of people saying that they sometimes have to go back and trying to search or edit their job spec. But when they get this page, they have to, people may be okay with both format, but they still have to wrap their head around because this is not what they submitted. So they have to really trying to figure out where, like trying to find the field, or trying to, like if they're trying to add something, or they're trying to find a value in this job spec. So the thing that we change here is that we're going to add the job specs, which is what people submitted, in this definition page as well. So people can toggle between these two views. This is probably be more familiar for the user because this is what they submitted. And with like the HCL variables, they can also see what is in their current version. And if people want to edit this page and go to edit, I think currently we have this feature, but they only allow in JSON. So now they can edit their HCL file with the variables too. We want to give like the text editor for them to actually also add their variables input in here as well. Yeah, so this is a pretty quick fix, but I think it will be very helpful for our users. So yeah.
Definitely useful information to see. We have a couple of interesting conversations going on in the chat. such as Fabian asking, what about history for the resource consumption? Would be nice to see CPU and memory in your allocation overview. I think Mike makes a really good point here. I'll let Mike make his own.
Yeah, so people will often like click into the allocation page and see the memory and CPU, and they want a historical historical history, a history of that. The issue for us is that if we logged all of that data in Nomad, we would need a very different type of data store to log that data, right? It would be every allocation ever that you'd have to go over. This is something we hear a lot about, but we just based on how our data store works, right? Like we can't write all that to Raft. That would clog up your Nomad cluster. We want to have that be specifically focused on scheduling. And so we end up relying on an APM like something like Prometheus plus Grafana or Datadog for that historical information. I think that's not likely to change. So I really think the solution here is to just make it easier to like get off the ground on that, right? Like, hey, run this Nomad pack, and you now have your perfect Prometheus Grafana setup with Nomad, and everything just kind of auto configures or something like that. I think we put that a little bit too much on our users to figure out, so we could help there. But unfortunately, I don't think that's something that's going to be just like integrated into the UI just based on how the data works, right? It's always going to have to be in an external database somewhere. And yeah, so that's kind of the unfortunate reality, is that just because there's so much data being emitted, we can't store it. We're only able to show real-time ephemeral snapshots of that.
I think it's also a view of the right tool for the right job. Having all of this data in Nomad could be helpful, but having it in any APM, like you mentioned, Datadog will give you a much broader insight, even outside of what Nomad is able to see. And I think that definitely makes it more rewarding. And on the topic of rewarding, definitely big yay for HCL job definitions. And yes, patience gets rewarded. This is always nice. This is an interesting one from Shantanu. Any plans to be able to add the URL to Grafana or whatever page really in the resources page? Like right now, you can define your console UI, you can define your Vault UI.
Broadly, yes. I don't have a timeline. So we've talked about this as making Nomad more the jumping off point, right? Because I don't know, I've been a user of Nomad on Terraform Cloud team. Often, if something was going wrong, we'd check Nomad first, then we'd jump to console, and then we jump to our APM. We've definitely talked about this internally. It's somewhere on our to-do list for the UI team, but not queued up for the next release or two, unfortunately. But yeah, we talk about that a lot, and always good to hear another data point there.
I think it's useful, especially if you can get in job variables to go to much deeper drill downs of your APM.
Yeah, I think some of the tricky part is, it'd be pretty easy to just say, here's a string URL on every job and make an A tag to that. When you have the interpolation, that user interface is a little bit tougher, but we could probably figure something out there.
It's great feedback. Thank you all for providing these. And meanwhile, Sylvain on LinkedIn asked, in the deployment components and during deployment, do the changes on HCL variables get listed?
Right now, there's not a diff. We've thought about it. That would be cool. We would have to, there are technical reasons why that's difficult. So not in V1, but we've definitely thought about that for, comparing over time. Another thing that I just want to call out with the HCL stuff is that, and sorry, I forget if Julie said this or not, but this would only apply to jobs where you've actually, written an HCL file. This doesn't get inferred. So if you've submitted via JSON, we're not going to be able to, say like, hey, this would be the exact HCL specification. It's really just going to be, hey, here's a snapshot of whatever HCL you wrote at the time, saving that and then being able to edit that. And if you have historical jobs, right, that were submitted, in Nomad version 1 or whatever, that's not going to just like auto-populate. And so just, not to temper excitement, but just want to get that out there too.
And then I think Shantanu just wants the option to add custom CSS to your Nomad UI, because that's really going to solve all of this.
Also on our list for sure. Julie's mocked that up a couple times, I think.
Yeah, we do want to give some freedom to the user, but we don't want to give too much. We don't want people to just customize the UI. So, but definitely, yeah, it's coming.
It's good feedback. So, who's next? We ready for Phil?
I think yes. Let me stop sharing.
Wrong person.
Okay. Well, let me get presenting here. And I want to say some of the things I'm going to show off are going to be things you can do today. Most of them are going to be things that you're going to be able to do shortly. And at least one of them is going to be something that's coming down the pipe at some point. So let me share this. And the first thing I want to show off is the Nomad Policies UI, which is coming up in an upcoming release. Right now, I'm logged in to Nomad as a manager, and we'll talk through some of these other things soon. But I have a management token, and under Operations on my left-hand sidebar, I have a new piece of UI called Policies. This is a pretty straightforward table view. It tells me which policies I have set up. I've got one called Designers and one called Engineering. If I click into these, I can see the definition of the policy, and I can modify or delete that policy. Some very basic things I can do, like just change the description, but I can also actually live change things about the policy. This means that tokens that have been taken out against that policy can be live updated without token invalidation or anything like that. You can say, oops, I've added some users under this token. I need to modify permissions based on something else that's happened externally. I can do that through the UI without having to go through command line or API at all. Even better, when you go to spin up a new policy, one thing that you can do is create a test token. So if I click this button real quick, in addition to fill and fill brief, which I see 2 tokens here, I click on this, I'll see a new one called example token for engineering with a little secret ID that I can copy to my clipboard right over here and start using as I see fit. If I log in under this, I'll have the permissions as outlined here. This is a 10-minute token. This is just meant to use for people that are trying out a policy before they try to do more of a deployment of that policy for their users. You can live delete tokens. You can do pretty much anything by the name of tokens from here. There's also the more scalable solution for when you have a policy that you've created where you can copy the command line tool for it, give it whatever name you want, and set whatever kind of a TTL on it that you want to. Previously, doing policy editing and token editing would be things that you're either using the Nomad operator API for, or the Nomad command line at at the ACL endpoints. We feel like the UI can be better leveraged to do things like this, and this is exactly why we wanted to build a tool like this. I'm not checking the chat, but if anybody has any feedback on this, my plan is to kind of go over feature by feature one at a time. If you have any policy editor questions or comments, same thing with token management, I'd be very happy to hear that too.
I think the biggest one is, what's the button that I have to push to get the best possible policy that makes sure nothing untoward can happen?
I think the best possible nothing untoward policy, the button would be the delete button, actually. If you want nothing untoward to happen, you just don't have anybody assigned to any policy, just you under management. No, that's a poor joke. Really, though, this is an interface that we think people are going to be able to make use out of to feel more confident in their policies. Right? There's a lot of different ways that you can write policies. Seeing them and testing them out visually really quickly with a short-lived token is one of the things that we think is going to be a game changer for some operators. Okay, on to the next. I want to talk through something that somebody mentioned in chat earlier. If you didn't see this launch in Nomad 1.4 something recently, we added in the ability to view logs for allocations and tasks and things like that here. you can click on the View Logs buttons underneath any of the allocations that are here, and you'll see the sidebar pop out. And for this one, I think that I have errors specifically. Is it this one? Yeah, I have my error logs for my Rails service. But one of the new things that we've just added, and we'll be shipping pretty soon, is recent events for that allocation, or for that task. So this is going to be one fewer thing that you need to have an extra deep click for, right? As it stands right now, one of the main reasons I might have wanted to click into this task in the first place is to view the recent events or to view the running logs, right? You know, short of files, you can now do all those things from the very top level at job. We think this is pretty neat. We think this is going to, you know, save people quite a lot of time. And for the person in chat who asked, you know, how do I, without having to click at least twice, how do I find out if the image was unable to download and something's unhealthy? This is exactly how you'd find that. Right? You can also view these from not just the job page, but also a task group page and an allocation page. So right from here, I can, sorry, from the task group itself, I could also do the same thing. But we think for most people, you're going to be viewing the sidebar off the job page. So this just landed, and it should be shipped pretty soon. The next feature I want to talk through is something that that landed and is in the most recent Nomad minor release, and it is KeyNav. I think a lot of people kind of overlook this because they use the UI in kind of a traditional way. But one of the things that we launched, I think, is kind of fun. We have keyboard nav throughout the app, and it is both meldable and moldable, and also kind of dynamic. So a quick way to get access to this is just touching Shift anywhere in the UI if you're on 144 or greater. Holding Shift anywhere in the UI is going to show you shortcuts to do a handful of things here. Some of them are pretty straightforward. I can go to my jobs page, I can go to my evaluations page just by typing GV or GE or GJ. And also it's dynamic in that I can see items in my list. And if I hit 01 or 03, I can see individual evaluations pop up. These work in traversal and navigation ways, but they're also pretty customizable. If you hit the question mark to pull up the keyboard shortcuts themselves, most of these can be edited. So instead of going to JAWS being GJ, I can say, hello is my new hotkey, and you can actually see my keystrokes. But if I close this and type in hello, I'm now on my jobs page. And this allows you to do lots of things from here. So I want to go into my first job, and then if I want to go to the definition page, I can hit Shift and right arrow and, you know, throw my mouse into freeway traffic now because I can just use my keyboard to do everything. Anyway, that's KeyNav in a nutshell. I hope that you give it a shot. Most things now have keyboard nav, including some of the newer features that we just added. So for example, if I go into my job and pop open a logs tab, which now has this handy dandy little expand button on it. That expand button also has a key binding of left, left, or right, right. So there's little things that you'll discover as you kind of play with it a little bit. We want operators to feel as comfortable in UI as they currently feel in the command line. And if that means feeling like you're using a power tool, you know, you're in NeoVim or whatever, go ahead and feel like that by using our keyboard nav and suggesting more as it comes to you. Okay, next up is an actively in development feature. We intend to ship this very soon, has not yet landed in main, but this is job templates. Right now, I think a lot of people know that when you go to kick off Nomad, you might be at a handful of different kinds of familiarity with what your jobs need to look like. And an awful lot of people do something like, from the command line, Nomad init or Nomad job init. And that also takes a couple of flags. For example, you can do Nomad job init short or Nomad job init connect. And you'll be given example job specs with extremely well commented, perhaps over commented, you know, specification. And this is meant to educate users, right? One of the problems with that is that one of the places where users need the most education is when they pop open the UI and say, oh boy, what do I press? Okay, it'll be the green button. Oh, geez, what do I do now? Okay, knowing how to drop a job spec in here often comes from, well, I've read a tutorial and I feel pretty comfortable trying this out, or I know this is supposed to look like HCL. Let me just try some example job spec I found in somebody's GitHub gist. Well, another way that you can get even better ones is by using job templates. This brand new feature that our colleague Jai, who's here, has been working on very heavily, will give you access to not only some existing Nomad defined, as in us defined, job templates that all Nomad clusters will come with by default. But also will allow you to define your own. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. So I'm going to click on the Hello World template and hit apply. And I can proceed with running my job just the same way I would have before. I can go through the planning phase and do everything else I want to. I can make edits from here. So pretend for a second like this Hello World job is meant for you and all the other operators on your team. And you know that you want them to more or less change driver to be whatever it needs to be, right? Maybe it's raw exec sometime. Well, you can just say, hey, edit this as needed. And even though this isn't a valid job spec necessarily anymore because the driver doesn't match up with what we need to, you can still save this as a template, knowing that your other teammates, so their operators that you work with, are going to have to edit this. So these are pretty malleable, right? Let's choose from a different template, the connect one. I can see that we have the example that we would have used from Nomad Java.net. Underneath the hood, these are using a relatively recent piece of Nomad tech that we've developed, Nomad variables. They live at a dedicated namespace. Nobody here has to know this. I just want to make it loud and clear. This can be a much nicer interface for editing these things. But if I wanted to, I could go in here and start messing with this, and I get a nice little editor so that I can change up my template for all my other teammates to be able to make use of. The long and the short of this is we think this is going to save people a ton of time and a lot of copy and paste headaches. It would be really nice if there is a standard Nomad way of saying, I run this kind of job pretty often, slight variations to it, depending who's running it or what our conditions are. I don't want people to have to reinvent the wheel every time. Here's a template.
And we had an interesting thought there from Shantanu. How about a job create wizard, a throwback to, I guess, Visual Basic based wizards?
Yeah, that'd sure be fun. I think that you probably saw a couple of things in what Julie was showing off earlier, where stuff like Nomad variables would get called out. We've toyed around with the idea internally of having a section underneath your HCL editor, or maybe alongside of it, where it would explain what you're doing as you go through it, and kind of doing the job of what these comments are doing. But it can do even more than that, right? We can have certain possible values or variables for possible different types or values for certain variables inside your job spec that you could define, and instead of having to type it out, it could just be a drop down, right? If we know that this thing can only be exec or raw exec or a handful of other things, then don't let the user possibly make a typo. Just let them select that from whatever interface makes the most sense. That's on the table as something we're discussing. The big thing that we're trying to avoid is making this so wizard-like that the power users are going to be turned off by it. Kind of a delicate balance, right?
Always a delicate balance. But user feedback helps us make these decisions. So if this is something you feel very strongly about, either way, just let us know so we can take that into account.
I have one more thing to show off here, and then I'll pause for any other further questions. This is of the 4 things I've showed so far. These are either out there or about to be out there, or actively in development where we intend for them to be out there pretty soon. This last thing is a little bit more pie in the sky. We're still at an early phase of trying to figure this out, but it is one of the most used things that the UI has no representation for whatsoever, and that's the event stream. If you're not familiar with the event stream, anything that happens inside of Nomad that gets applied to a wrapped index, more or less anything, generates an event that you can tap into by using the Nomad event API. I'm sure somebody will share a link here in the chat. Otherwise, I will in a second to the documentation for that. But there's this discontinuity with how you might use the stream like this, right? A lot of times people find the UI is really helpful for debugging, the evaluations tab, for example. But we don't have any representation of possibly the most valuable debugging tool there is, the full list of payloads of things that happened and when they happened over the history of my cluster. So one of the things that we did during a hackathon, and please forgive the kind of messy screenshots here, is think about what it would look like to lay out events across time and across RAF indices and let you see the details of them. So I'll explain kind of what's going on in this very hacky, again, please don't critique my poor design skills here, at least not too hard. These are representations of different events that have happened at different raft indices. If I zoom in down here at the bottom, you can see little numbers. This is 8, 42, 47. Those are raft indices of when these events took place. They are color coordinated to mean certain things. So orange events are node events. And in fact, these are nodes came online. And then blue events are jobs, for example. We thought about making a little interface by which you can filter down to just my job events or just my allocation events or something like that. Clicking on one of these, importantly, gives you the payload of that thing, right? As in I've clicked on an event called service deregistration. Here is the information about that service. And really crucially, clickable links for all the other events that happened at that same moment, all the other service deregistrations, and also events related to that same thing that happened at a different time. So just to give this in context, because I know this sounds probably a little bit weird and abstract to some people, this might let me say, oh, this service deregistered. Is that something with this service, or did something else happen that caused this to happen? I can probably tell just by seeing that there were 4 other events happening at this time, and they were all other service deregistrations. I probably had a service go, or I probably had an allocation go down, or I might have just had an entire node go down. I can see that other events unrelated to this particular service also went down at this time. If I wanted to, I could see if those had something to do with a particular node. I could perhaps click on this moment where the service itself is registered, see if that happened on a node that is now down. And this allows me to traverse this list and see kind of visually when many things happened or didn't. It doesn't just mean that you'd only be looking at services, right? You might see that in this case, a plan result, as in job spec looks good, happened at the same time as a handful of other things. You might have planned out several things, and on successful plan, they launched, right? And then after that plan, you might have registered the job and the allocation itself updated, et cetera, et cetera. So we're thinking about this a lot. We would love some feedback on this. One of the things that we want to know is, do you look at this and think to yourself, oh, this is a nice way to view the topology over time? Or do you think of this and think, wow, if I was in a debugging situation and it was the middle of the night and I was freaking out, this would help me out a lot? Or do you say something like, I love these colors, I want more colorful dots in my UI, right? We kind of want to know if this is appealing and what makes it appealing to you as an operator. We'd love to hear feedback about this in the comments or otherwise. And I'll stop sharing here so I can take any feedback or answer anything that comes up.
There we go. And this is an important one from Mike. So if you have any common use cases or workflows, especially with regards to checking the event stream, let us know what you're running into, what works well, what doesn't work well. That feedback may make it into a future version of Nomad and make it better for all of us. Beautiful comments.
Yeah, coordinating events elsewhere in the system. That's kind of exactly what drives us, right? And you know, everybody here on video kind of knows this already, but some of the things that might be frustrating about having me work on features like this is I am a very poor command line user, right? So when you see things like keyboard nav and UI, just know that I want to use the UI like a command line because I'm too scared of using the command line. And things like the event stream being used just from the command line or just via the API, really, really useful. Also really useful to pipe that into whatever tool you want to. But for people that use Nomad, perhaps more like I do, where they have a lot of comfort in the UI, it'd be nice to not have to leave that comfort zone.
I think that's definitely the fine line that you have to walk on that you mentioned earlier. Figuring out what works for the power user while not upsetting the new user, but also not making it too simple or too complicated. Meanwhile, if you have feedback for Mike on any of this, make sure you share your feedback. We'll share a link to Mike's Calendly instance, website, whatever, in the comments. So definitely join us there. Or Mike, anyway. So with a couple of minutes left, we are going to have another community office hours end of February. Super excited for that one. Mike, do you want to give a slight preview?
Yeah, so there's a Nomad release that should be beta in the not too distant future, or the pretty near future. Not like this week or anything, but hopefully next 4 weeks, 5 weeks, somewhere there. As part of that, we're going to have OIDC integration and single sign-on. And so that's one of the topics we're going to talk about, and maybe just go over some of the other stuff that's coming in that beta, the 1.5 beta. Yeah, and that's the preview.
That is definitely a very, very exciting feature to come our way. It's going to be worth checking in. We'll have live demos for it, of course. Meanwhile, if you're new to Nomad or not, head on over to developer.hashicorp.com/nomad. You'll find all the documentation, tutorials, of course, installation guides. But let's be honest, you've already installed it. So you just need to figure out how to configure it all. And then, any parting words from any of you at this point?
I just want to say thanks for all the feedback. Right after this, we're going to go through this list and talk about literally every single one of these points. And it really, really does help us decide what's next, and not only know like what we could do, but the weight and how much pain is associated with each issue that's open, and how much desire is associated. So thank you for the feedback. It really does help determine what we do. And so thanks.
Thank you all for joining us, to our audience, but also Phil, Julie, Mike, thank you for coming back. Jai, who's off camera currently. Beautiful questions. I like the energy. Keep it going. Chat with Mike on Calendly or find him on GitHub. Leave an issue. The more information you give us, the easier it is for us to reproduce a possible bug and figure out how to fix it. And I think, as James says, wave. YouTube doesn't really render Slack emojis, but yeah, I agree with Shantanu. Great session. Thank you all. And with that, stay safe and only deploy running jobs.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.